After 3 days, I'm finally going to actually talk about Genesis of the Daleks. Welcome to the Time Treadmill. I'm Ron, and these are my sweaty thoughts about Doctor Who. So first of all, setting aside all of the metatextual content, all of the historical significance of this story, all of that stuff, just looking at Genesis of the Daleks on the basis of the story itself, this is just a fantastic story. Classic Doctor Who does tend to have a problem with the longer stories where the plot sags in the middle and it really feels like padding. And this is a 6-episode story, so you might expect that to happen here, and yet it never does. Everything in the story justifies itself, and it moves from point to point to point with a terrific pace and with excellent mini cliffhangers along the way, and it all leads to an incredible, rousing, thought-provoking ending. And to Terry Nation's credit, he does very little repeating himself here. Yes, he does have the inevitable trek through tunnels and encounter mutant creatures subplots, and those happen a couple of times early on, but they really are pretty minor. And to that point, really kind of one of the worst cliffhangers in the story is when Harry Sullivan is attacked by a giant land clam. I mean, really? But even with that, just on a pure storytelling level, this story works beautifully. The key characters are split up early on. They face different unique challenges. They ultimately come back together. The stakes rise story by story. There are unexpected twists and turns. And the climax of the story takes one incredible loop that the viewers never would have seen coming. It's just really well done. So just on a fundamental storytelling level, this is a great story. But that's not what makes it the most significant story in Doctor Who history. To understand the subtext of the story, you have to put yourself in the mind frame of a generation of people in the United Kingdom who still have the Second World War firmly in their living memories. Yes, the children watching this weren't there for the Second World War, but their parents definitely were, or if not their parents, certainly their grandparents. And the scarring of Europe and Britain are still very readily visible. The memories of the Nazi regime and the bombings and the genocide, all of that is very, very fresh in British memory at the time this story was written. And the Nazi symbolism in this story is not in the least bit subtle. The Daleks have always been portrayed as intergalactic space Nazis, but here that reference is taken to the extreme, and with Davros, the creator of the Daleks, basically cast in the role of a Joseph Mengele taken to the extreme end. And with that, by the climax of the story in the 6th episode, the Doctor is placed in the impossible position of having the opportunity to destroy the Daleks once and for all. This image right here is perhaps the single most iconic image in the history of the show, with the 4th Doctor agonizing over whether or not to touch those wires and to commit genocide. It's a moment that he returns to several times in the future of the show, sometimes with pride, sometimes with regret. And it is the key moral question of the story. And this, remember, Doctor Who is a children's program. Now, Genesis of the Daleks was taken to task by the infamous Mary Whitehouse for its violent content. She and her entire movement felt that it was grossly inappropriate for children. And that's a common sentiment you see today. But look at this story. There is no outright gore or graphic content in this story. It's an early evening children's thriller program. But yes, there is quite a bit of death and destruction over the course of this story. I mean, holy cow, at one point Davros deliberately keys off the destruction of his entire race, the Khalids. And then he turns around and unleashes the Proto-Daleks and virtually destroys the entire Thal race. So genocide abounds in this story, as do multiple scenes on one-on-one combat and World War II style battlefields and World War I style trenches and all of those things, all of these horrors of war are presented to the viewers, to the young viewers, as a reality of this world we live in. But all of that is there to beg the question of morality and the importance of morality. When it comes down to it, what Davros does in order to create the Daleks is creates a race of creatures in which all emotion, all compassion, all sense of ethics are completely absent. They are creatures of pure hatred and domination. The sole reason they exist is to become the one remaining life form in the universe. They are evil personified. And yet, even with all of that, the moral of the story was that the Doctor did not have the moral or ethical justification to commit genocide himself. And so he takes actions to help minimize the risk, but he also, in the closing scene, points out the good that will come in the wake of the existence of the Daleks, and that pain begets joy, and struggle is worthwhile. A life without conflict, a life without pain is not really a life at all. And here I am giving myself talk therapy live on the internet. So, I should mention I'm going through a few things myself right now. So if I'm a little maudlin, that's where that's coming from. But in any case, if for some reason you have not seen Genesis of the Daleks, if all you've ever seen is modern Doctor Who, and you're curious in tipping your toes into classic Who, this is it. This is the one story. This is the 3 hours that you can spend and you can be thoroughly entertained and witness an excellent story unfolding and see the depths to which this program is capable of when you take a moment to really look at it. Now, there is one other significant thing I want to point out about this story. Now, I've been vocal probably too many times about how much I hate the Daleks. And one of the reasons that I love Genesis of the Daleks is, first of all, it's the exception that proves the rule. But more importantly, this was the point where the writers, the producers, realized that less is more. The Daleks appear here, and the Daleks will not return again for several more years. At this point, the producers really took a hard stance of stringing out and making recurring appearances of villains very, very rare. And so we get this Dalek story and not another one for, I think, 5 years. Likewise, tomorrow's Cyberman story is the first appearance of the Cybermen in more than 5 years. And so even though in this season we have back-to-back appearances by 2 of the 3 most iconic villains in the show's history, the Master doesn't show up again for a while, but those appearances happen back-to-back, and then there is thankfully a gap before they show up again. And that, to me, is such a relief. We are entering a phase of the series where every story is unique and original with its own villain, its own challenges, and its own unique excitement. And for that, I am psyched. And on that note, I've been talking way too long. I'm going to call it a day. Please join me tomorrow for the beginning of Revenge of the Cybermen. I'll see you then.